Welcome to the Ecomm Breakthrough Podcast. Are you ready to unlock the full potential and growth in your business? You've already crossed 7 figures in sales, but the challenge is knowing how to take your business to the next level. Join Josh Hadley, an 8-figure Ecomm business owner and investor, as he interviews highly successful business owners. Get ready, because you're going to learn specific actions you can take today to help your business reach its full potential and leave a lasting impact on the world.
Welcome to the Ecomm Breakthrough Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Hadley, where I interview the top business leaders in e-commerce. Past guests include Kevin King, Steve Simonson, and Stephen Pope. Today, I'm excited to be speaking with Simone Hammer, the VP of Product at the Vimbly Group, and we will be talking a lot about sales optimization and mastering the basics of e-commerce that allow you to scale. This episode is brought to you by Ecomm Breakthrough Consulting, where I help take 7-figure companies to 8 figures and beyond. Listen, Simone, I started Hadley Designs back in 2015, and I grew it to an 8-figure brand in 7 years. But I made a lot of mistakes along the way that made the path to getting to 8 figures take a little bit longer. There were times where I doubted whether our business could survive, whether it could become a real brand, or whether I myself could actually be the CEO of a successful e-commerce brand. I wish I would have had a guide to help me grow faster and avoid a lot of those stumbling blocks. If you've hit a similar plateau and want to know the next steps to take your business to the next level, then go to ecommbreakthrough.com. That's Ecomm with 2 M's to learn more. And as a special bonus to my podcast listeners, this month I'm giving away one $10,000 comprehensive business strategy audit at no cost. All you need to do is email me at josh@ecommbreakthrough.com with the subject line strategy audit for your chance to win. Tell me why you think your business should be the one that's selected. And don't worry if you're not selected this month, because you will be entered for future months to come. But today I'm excited to introduce you to Simone Hammer. Simone is the VP of Product at the Vimbly Group, a New York City-based firm that scales and invests in tech-enabled businesses, where he has worked for over 10 years. He currently runs Vimbly Group's e-commerce business unit, as well as having his hands involved in a number of Vimbly Group's 8 other business units. Prior to the Vimbly Group, Simone was a healthcare investment banker at a boutique investment bank in New York City, where he focused on raising capital and mid-market mergers and acquisitions involving biotech, healthcare technology, and healthcare service companies. He has a bachelor's degree from Cornell University, and I met Simone at the $1 Billion Seller Summit earlier this year. And Simone, I'm excited to welcome you to the podcast. Welcome.
Thanks, Josh. Really appreciate the nice intro. Thanks for having me.
Well, likewise, we had a great conversation at the $1 Billion Seller Summit. And one of the first things that we talked about when I met you is you're like, yeah, I kind of have like 8 different businesses that I'm involved in right now. And I was like, wait, hold on, back up. Like, let's dive into this further. And so from the moment we had that first conversation, I was like, this is a guy who's doing some awesome stuff that I need to not only follow you, but would love to have you on the podcast. And so, Simone, you've got a lot of experience with mergers and acquisitions. You've been at the Vimbly Group for a while. Why don't you walk us through that journey and kind of how you got into the world of e-commerce? Because prior to that, you were an investment banker, right? So that's definitely a different realm that I would say your typical e-commerce business owner doesn't necessarily start in investment banking, but would love to hear kind of how that transition happened and what the Vimbly Group is all about.
Yeah. So it's, I guess, from the healthcare investment banking side, admittedly, it was first job out of school. And at Cornell, you just happened to have, at least the network that I was a part of, just happened to have a lot of people going into finance at the time. So admittedly followed the herd, went into finance. I was pre-med at school, realized I didn't want to do that at some point towards the end of my college career. And so it was kind of this nice little kind of merger of some things that I was doing with healthcare and then, again, following the herd. But I enjoyed my time, learned a ton about, that has shaped basically the way I think about business now.
Sure.
And at the end, I got linked up with Sam and Chris, who are two guys who were tossing around this idea of starting this marketplace for people to find and book recreational activities called Vimbly.com. So there's no website, just kind of like an idea. And linked up with them, we built out what was Vimbly.com and still is Vimbly.com. It's a marketplace for people to find and book things like wine and cheese tastings, skydiving, cooking classes, dance lessons. And then after about a couple years, we started being able to license out the technology that we built. Long story short, we did that, had a few successful exits, parlayed some of that into investing in businesses and acquiring businesses, and then home growing our own. At some point, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, we started doing a deeper dive into this whole e-commerce space, or what most of the people think about e-commerce, where it's, Amazon, Shopify, things of that nature. And felt like it was a good opportunity to support some of the growth that we were having with our other traditional, software businesses. And everything is kind of a tech focused. That's kind of our kind of sweet spot where we can parlay our experience with different technologies and expertise on different, SaaS products to different industries. And we thought that e-commerce was a growing space. We thought we had this unique ability where we had operational expertise from running some other businesses to, really start to kind of do like a roll-up strategy, kind of akin to what aggregators do now, but a little bit before they really became popular. The mission was never to kind of like buy, grow, and sell, kind of traditional like private equity, but to really buy and hold and grow and use it to fund some other businesses. And kind of what we've done in other business units is where we've built stuff, see if that's come from needs, see if there's maybe something that we can build and grow from the software side out of our own needs, being operators of an e-commerce business. And so, fast forward to today, we've acquired a few brands, and we're constantly looking at others, and trying to launch some new products as well. So that's where we are today.
I know that we could probably dive into a lot of weeds there in that story.
And that's just one business unit too. I mean, we have a few others, but I think, this being the Ecomm podcast, we'll keep it focused on that.
Yeah. No, this is great. And that's what's exciting. I think you've got your hands into so many different kind of business ventures. You're seeing what's working even outside of e-commerce. And I think that's one of the important things to do is like, I think we all want to like specialize in e-commerce, and we think like, hey, what's the latest and greatest like e-commerce strategies or hacks and things like that. But if you really like almost like step outside the box and you say, what's working for restaurant owners, right? How are they driving traffic? What's working for them? How are they building their audience or list, right? And you start taking kind of the best practices from other industries, and then you can kind of get completely brand new ideas into, e-commerce, for example. And so I think that's what's interesting is you've got your hands in so many different things here, Simone. Let's dive into some of those things in e-commerce that you are looking for. So as you look to acquire other brands, and I love that you kind of were an acquirer or aggregator before the aggregator thing became popular. So you're not on the bandwagon there. You can be like, no, we were doing this a long time ago. So what do you look for when you're looking to acquire a brand? So walk us through that kind of thought process.
Yeah. So I think one of the very first things that we always kind of toss around and make sure about is market size. I like to use the example of, if you have, and what's the true market size, right? Because a lot of time, numbers are funny. You can use any sort of number and find any sort of number to affirm, confirmation bias, right? Affirm any sort of narrative that you're portraying. But get really smart and be honest about what's the true market size. And so I like to use this example of, in terms of e-commerce space, if you're looking at a product and you have your main keyword, and say it's roughly 50,000 searches, and, you look at your product opportunity explorer, or, use Helium 10 or Data Dive, whatever, and you see that, the 80% of the clicks are going to the top 5 products. Well, is your true market size really 50,000, searches per month? No, probably not, right? So let's, just use some thumb in the air math here and say, okay, well, if 80% of the clicks are going to these top 5 products, well, it's reasonable to say, okay, well, right off the bat, you're probably not going to enter into that market. So you really just have that remaining 10,000 searches. And then we could say, okay, well, of that, right, what's realistic can we take from the remaining portion? So I don't know, conservative basis, let's say 10%. Maybe you want to, toot your own horn. You have this amazing product. You take a little bit more of that, but let's say 10%. So we're already down to 1,000 searches, right? And then of that, what's your conversion rate, right? So let's be conservative, say a modest 10%. Are you looking at 100 searches or 100 sales per month, roughly? And is that sufficient size for your business, right? For the time that you're going to spend. And I think what we've seen across businesses, and I'm sure, Josh, you've launched way more products than we have. What the time and effort that goes into your smallest product from a revenue standpoint is probably just the same or almost nearly the same as for your hero product. And that's the case not just with e-commerce, right? This is the case with every business that we have, that we own. The amount of energy it takes to do small deals is just as great as doing big deals, right? And so it's what space do you want to play in. So market size is really everything, right? Especially if you start talking about, you have a more niche product, right? And so, yeah, you may fit under this, right? Maybe you have an interesting doorstop, right? And doorstop, has, again, 50,000 searches, but are you really playing in just the doorstop marketplace? If yours is super unique, maybe not, right? And so I think getting really smart about that is pretty critical, because that sets the stage for everything else that you're going to do and how much energy is realistic for you to put into this and what you can expect, right? What's your real ROI? After that, it's all about competitive advantage, right? I think, again, this isn't unique to e-commerce or, products. This is the case with SaaS. It's the case with, a restaurant, right? What kind of competitive advantage? What is it going to attract people to buy from you? And I think we have some interesting things that we failed on the e-commerce side. And, again, the past 10 years, I think we've messed that up a lot. But at the end of the day, why is someone going to buy from you? What can you answer that yourself? And if you don't have a strong enough answer for that, whether we're buying, we're starting new, we're partnering up. Well, if you can't answer that yourself and you got all this knowledge in front of you, then that consumer of whatever it is that you're selling, product, service, what have you, is probably not going to be able to do that in the 5-10 seconds that they're looking at what it is that you have to offer. So I think those two things kind of kick off everything that we do. And then from there, that we have some due diligence. And then I think everybody has their own, kind of personal style in terms of how they like to value opportunities. But I think those two are absolutely critical. And without those two and having really honest answers to those, you're kind of setting yourself up to fail.
Interesting. I love that you talked about, the market opportunity first and foremost. So I guess at this point, you guys are kind of like swinging for the fences, so to speak, right? Like you want to move into products where there's massive, market opportunity. Is that what you're saying? Or are you trying to establish like, hey, there's room for disruption in this market and there is, some meat on the bones, so to speak?
Yeah. So it's a good question. And I'll keep this answer focused on e-commerce because that answer is actually slightly different depending upon the business unit because of where different businesses are. But in terms of e-commerce, we're actually looking at a lot of different things. We're not just looking at the ones with the largest market, because the ones with the largest market and you're trying to take market share, so you have an innovative product, right? Not just a different mousetrap, right? You actually have something new to bring to the table. We're looking at some of those. But at the same time, we're also looking at some, to use a baseball analogy, right? We're also looking at just some singles, right? Because a lot of singles equals a home run, right? And so we're kind of looking at things across the board. When we look to acquire, we're generally looking at things that have a bigger market potential, because there's a lot more things to get a deal done over the finish line. And then there's kind of a lot of work to incorporate a business that you acquire rather than starting a new product within your portfolio.
Yeah.
And as I think we're starting to see across e-commerce space, more people, especially us now, are really starting to try to focus on brand building. And in those situations where you're building out a product line and you're actually building out a brand, having a bunch of singles is not a bad thing because there's a lot of different things that you can do with those smaller products.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a roundabout way of saying we kind of look at everything from an e-commerce perspective. But going back to it being the market size, we have to know ahead of time, like, if we are going after a smaller market, we have to know that in advance because we're going to say, okay, well, we know that this is a smaller market. So when we prioritize and when we do different things, we're going to allocate it only the attention that this is going to deserve because it's never going to be bigger than that. Right. And so it's an ROI question at that point, return on investment. And so maybe this is like the investment banker speech coming out in me, but I think, even in those questions where we say, okay, we'll go after the smaller market, it's still of utmost importance because then it's going to affect later on how we view that ROI and how we prioritize it and how much time and energy we're going to put into it just because of the return that we could potentially get on that smaller thing. It's not that we shy away from it. We just have to know up front what that math is to make it actual add up to positive value.
Yeah. I think that's so important. And I think you did a really good job. You kind of alluded to it earlier, but with our brand, we have over 1,300 different products. So we've had our fair share of launching different products and seeing what works and what doesn't work. Right. And not everything has been like a huge success. Right. There are a lot of singles and a lot of bunts along the way that just get us those base hits, going back to your baseball analogy. And then we have had a handful of those home runs that do like just move the business further, that much further. But I like, especially as we're moving into a more mature phase of our business, we are now finally kind of going into those bigger product opportunities that are going to require extra capital and probably advanced strategies in terms of being able to market those products than we did before. So I'm curious to hear kind of your thoughts, Simone. The way that we grew our brand was honestly like we probably did the opposite of what you're doing in terms of like looking at market potential. We probably started with like, all right, what's the small markets that we can play in? And we honestly flew under the radar for the first 4 years, right? Like you would look at our portfolio and the best products doing like maybe 5 to 10 sales a day at best, right? But we've got a bunch of singles that are just like, that's compounded. Like it's a multi-million-dollar business. But yeah, granted, there are a lot of SKUs. So I'm curious, like in your experience, maybe there at the Vimbly Group, unless you're VC funded and you just come with a bunch of cash and, a bunch of connections where you can just hire a bunch of executives to go run things, do you almost recommend, people just kind of like scaling up like piece by piece? And maybe it is okay to maybe start by playing in those smaller fields, right? But then understand that if you want to take your brand to the next level, right, 8 figures and beyond, then you do need to start really looking at the market size and moving into more of those, let's say competitive spaces where you see opportunities. What are your thoughts on that breakdown there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably really smart. I mean, the way you did it from, for us, again, it's a little bit different because we were coming from a place where we were going to start by acquiring, right?
Right.
And we did that because it's a lot easier to acquire a business that's already at one than to go from 1 to N is a lot easier. I mean, there's some troubles, don't get me wrong. But going from 0 to 1 is a lot harder a lot of times.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we see that. I mean, we launch some products and it takes a lot of work and it's, launching's hard. And so I think, it kind of depends on a couple things. 1, your risk profile. 2, how much capital you have to start and what you're willing to kind of put up with. Because usually in the bigger markets, if you're going to play, you need a little bit more capital to play because you need to do a little bit more marketing to get your name out there. You may need to, run at tighter margins for a longer period of time to get your early sales. And if it's a bigger market, it's probably a little bit more established. There's more players, which inherently, macroeconomics speaking, there's going to be thinner margins to begin with. So you it requires much more kind of math, right, up front to be like, okay, well, if I'm going to start in a bigger marketplace or a bigger market size, and I'm going to go after bigger terms, I need to be really smart on, okay, well, what is realistic in terms of my upfront capital investment to say, okay, this is how long I'm going to run at like a break even, or even I'm going to run at a little bit of a loss, right? And I'm okay with that because this is the purpose that I'm going to do that, right? Even today, right? I mean, we hate doing things at a loss, right? I mean, like it's just bad business, right? But sometimes we will, in the event that we say, okay, well, I see why we're going to do this for like a month or a few weeks or, 2 months, it's stretching a little bit, but like I can see why we're going to do that because the potential gain after those 2 months is so large and we can stomach that, right? We're okay with losing X to make Y. And so everything comes back to this, right? Like, again, I think, it comes back to the market size because you have to be sure on Y or have a reasonable % chance that or outcome that you believe in that this Y can happen, right? You're going to make Y, make that return by investing X or losing X. And so I think, again, comes back to that market size where when you start smaller, right, and maybe your risk profile is a little less, like you don't have to make some of those decisions, right? You could be a little bit more loosey-goosey with it, or you don't have to be as fine-tuned in terms of, what the actual loss is because you don't have as tight margins in that market potentially. So I think, as you get bigger and you really want to take the next step, I think eventually you are going to have to take on some of those bigger questions, right? You're going to have to take on those bigger market sizes. You're going to have to say, okay, well, I'm going to have to invest a little bit more to actually grow that brand up front. And again, we start talking about brands, I think, as you get bigger because it's ultimately the way kind of e-commerce is moving, where if you don't have that brand that people can really latch onto, you don't have that product line that you can, cross-sell, upsell, you don't have something that really distinguishes you. And that's ultimately what is your brand is helping out with, your competitive advantage and helping you distinguish what it is that you have. Well, then, there's a whole bunch of people or sellers out there that are going to be selling something very, very similar for probably a reduced price just because they're trying to do the same things as you are, right? And acquire market share. So,
Yeah. No, I think those are good. Those are good takeaways. And I agree with you there. I think that, people just need to understand where they're at in their journey, right? And for us, we are finally at the place where we can make, we just put a PO in for $250,000. We would not have been able to do that a few years ago, right? And so it's been building up kind of those cash reserves, so to speak, so that we can go play in some of those big market opportunities. But I think that's the vision that I would hope the listeners have, is that they understand this is where you can go, not just continuing to play in the small space that you might be currently playing in, but maybe being willing to venture it out into those bigger spaces. And that's where, the returns can be greater, but you also have to get more experienced with running the numbers, being good at math, and being able to track your KPIs. And then that's a whole nother level of building out a team of people that can help in building this and achieving that vision. So I think we could go on and on and on with that there. But Simone, what I did want to dive back into is, so you found a product or a company that is in a good market, right? That it's a big market opportunity that you guys see. They are differentiated. What are some of the other key things that you look at when you get into the more details of a business that make you say oh yes, let's move forward on acquiring this brand, versus what are some maybe even warning flags, would maybe even be better ones to say if you see things like this, start running for the hills, so to speak.
Yeah. So I think there's kind of a bunch of questions. One of the first ones is always do we believe in this? Are we excited about doing this? Right. I think, as an example, we bought a brand, Nature's Hangout, and, it did a lot of what we call outdoor specialty. So there were some bird feeders, there's some hammocks, hammock straps. It's kind of a little bit all over the place. It wasn't a cohesive, necessarily brand. We kind of lumped it in this thing called outdoor specialty. And, we weren't as excited at the time about some of the outdoor stuff. Or what I would consider traditional, like outdoor stuff. So like the hammocks, hammock straps. We're more excited about the bird feeders for a number of different reasons. And, one of my partners, he had a bunch of birds growing up, was super excited about it, right? Like, I had a few bird feeders before we bought the business, and he was like all gung ho about that side of it. And so we're super excited about it, built it up, we're killing it. And we're like, okay, well, maybe we have, a kind of a little segue into this like animal space, if you will. And granted, this was also at the time where very early on, Nature's Hangout was actually the first traditional e-com business that we bought, or what's called Amazon business that we bought. And so this was more back in the day where we were just throwing up products, and people could just throw up products. You didn't really need to build brands, and that was all well and great. Like you could build a really big business just having ad hoc products. And so we were like, okay, well, even so, like we could actually have this nice little portfolio of products that we could maybe turn into a brand, or really build out kind of rebrand Nature's Hangout into this animal specific company, right? And we looked at bat feeders, squirrel feeders, a whole bunch of different things. We're doing some test buys, and squirrel feeders ended up bubbling to the top for a number of different reasons. And, pretty quickly, actually, we were, kind of top of the page. We're doing pretty well. For a number of different reasons, but one of the biggest ones is we didn't 100% believe in squirrel feeders, right? At the end of the day, It wasn't really a space that we wanted to play in. And, we had our sights on all these other things, right? And this is also, I'm going to double back on kind of focus and priorities and keeping the main things here. But I think at the end of the day, right, like we saw with squirrel feeders was that, look, there's like a nice market opportunity where we kind of like carved ourselves out. We're, ranking really well. And we didn't listen to what the customers were saying at the end of the day for a number of different reasons. One, we didn't believe in it. Two, it was just our fault. Like we should have now this is like a critical piece in when we assess things, like what are the customers saying about these products, right? And we just flat out were not doing that, which is a shame too, because, it's bad on us because we came from a software space where, I was lead product on a number of different businesses that we built out. And my whole job was just to listen to customers, right? And the way we built our product was by listening to those customers. And we just didn't do that. And we took our eye off the ball. Overnight, our rating went from 4.3 to 4.2, which meant that on Amazon, the stars went from 4.5 to 4.
Yeah, right.
And sales tanked overnight. Long story short, we never recovered from it. And recently, we just made this decision to kind of write down the inventory. So we basically considered it all the inventory we had, just total loss on our books. And so, lesson learned from that pretty quickly. When we're looking at businesses, one, it's got to be something that we're excited about, because you're not excited about it, well, everything goes out the window. But two, we got to look at the qualitative stuff too, right? Like we can look at numbers all day, but again, numbers paint, and especially in the day of these brokers and so many people selling their businesses and putting together pitch decks and IMs that with all these numbers that look really good, and we just come off COVID times where some businesses just exploded, right? What numbers are real versus what's not. And sometimes it's kind of hard to differentiate. And so that's why you got to layer in the qualitative stuff. And again, we didn't do that. Bad on us. Should have known better. Won't make that mistake again.
What other qualitative stuff would you say that people should be considering then? So aside from, what people are saying about the products themselves, right? I think what people are saying about, this is from a building brand perspective, but what people are saying about the brand, right? Okay. Do you have great customer service? Do people like, are people unhappy with their product for X, Y, and Z reason? But then do they follow up with, oh man, this customer service was amazing. Yeah. And that kind of brand equity counts for a lot. It's hard to value, but if you have passionate people, and people who are excited about what you're doing, well, then you can get them do a lot of advanced kind of marketing strategies, or you can use them for a lot of the advanced marketing strategies that you want to do. And you have a platform to then go and launch new products, to test products out with, to do a whole bunch of different things where
you have a target audience immediately at your disposal and they already like what you're doing. It's actually really hard to even get people to know what you're doing and then get them to like what you're doing.
Yeah.
So if you even have that, right, well, then you're a few steps ahead and then you could do a lot of different things. And so I think, really seeing what people are saying about the product, what the brands, and truly listening, right? And then I think that's really big. And we do some stuff, ahead of time also where we'll, like before we actually get into diligence with, or get under LOI with a company, where we'll go out, buy a few products, and like literally do like some guerrilla marketing stuff where we'll get some people to come in the door, see what they say. We'll do a bunch of surveys. So that's a little bit, I like seeing people, right? Again, this is going back to software days. Like I like seeing people interact physically with the product, right? Whether it's software, whether it's a physical product, like seeing their eyes, seeing where their eyes go, seeing their nonverbal cues, I think is immensely important, right? When someone says they like it, but their body language is like this, yeah, it's pretty good. But someone says, yeah, it's pretty good. Like, that's a big difference. Yeah. And I think all those little things are things that, again, we do, and we try to do in a non-scalable way before we can, do it in a much more scalable way. And so I think the qualitative stuff, seeing what people say, seeing how people react, not just about the product, but about the brand. Those are kind of all key measurables that we look at and that I specifically, again, kind of some of my background, I tend to focus on. And if they are great, that's a huge, it could be a deciding factor. If it's a negative thing, it's certainly a huge kind of, linchpin factor. So, yeah.
I think that's really interesting, Simone. I think you've taken this approach that's actually a little bit different than I think the typical answer is, right? Because I've listened to a bunch of other people that talk about acquiring businesses, and I'm looking at these specific numbers, and I'm trying to draw conclusions and kind of look at 2020 and what happened during COVID and say, okay, this was an artificial bump, and it's all very quantitative, right? I'm looking at the numbers. I'm making sense of this financially. I can see that I could shave off 10% of their cost of goods sold. I feel like I could reduce maybe their FBA fee if we repackage the product differently. But what I love is that you just focused on like the consumer experience and the brand in and of itself, right? And as you go through due diligence of a brand, it's not just due diligence of looking at the financial statements and seeing if you guys would be good partners or they're a good business owner. Rather, you're going through and you're like purchasing the product. You're not only looking at the product, but then you're sending it to other customers, right? Or a focus group, so to speak, right? To get real feedback and maybe even open up some customer support tickets and see what it feels like on the receiving end instead of just taking people's word for it. And so I think that's an amazing like mindset shift that I just had is like, go the extra mile. Yeah, quantitative stuff. That should be the given, right? And I think there's numerous books and talks about what you should be looking at that way. But what I think maybe, and you have a lot more experience of this than I do, is that something that most people overlook? Is that qualitative stuff of what's their brand? What are consumers really saying? How does their customer service actually work? And, what are people saying about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's one of the most overlooked things, and we're guilty of it too, right? Like, all the quantitative stuff that you're talking about, like looking at historicals, it's a given, right? We always do that. We've always done it, and for the longest time, that's all we did. And one of our brands, Cressimo, right now is going through a major shift in that it, for such a long time, survived on 3 products. Basically, there's a whole, there's more SKUs, but it's basically, or more ASINs, but there's effectively 3 ASINs. One of those, it's basically a shell of itself now. And part of the reason why is because, actually, if you'll divulge me for a second, I had this. So, pre-COVID, and even through the first, couple years of COVID, and depending on where you want to, start and stop it, I guess, or, where the beginning till now is, I guess. But first couple of years of it, it was doing incredibly well, right? It was something like anywhere between 25 and 35%, or it accounted for 25 to 35% of our gross margin. That gross margin, I'm including everything from landed costs, 3PL costs, FBA costs, advertising, marketing, returns, all that stuff.
Wow. Okay.
Just not just not like overhead and software, things like that nature, but gross profit, right? And so it was a large part of our business, this one product. And, during the beginning of COVID, I got my hands on a competitor, one of our biggest direct competitors, their information memorandum, which is basically like their this deck. It's like 50 pages of their business because they were trying to sell their business.
Okay.
And through my partner Sam, he has just a ton of connections in the entrepreneur space, a ton of connections with these brokers, and so we get a lot of deals, right, across a lot of different industries. And so we just happened to get a direct competitor's information memorandum, right? So this gave us everything about their business, right? We knew their numbers, we knew who their suppliers were, right? What their strategy was, what their projections were, you name it, we knew it. And we were like, we could look on Helium 10 and know that we were dominating, but then we saw the real numbers. We were dominant player in the market. And then all of a sudden, right, like during COVID, you start seeing freight costs go up. You start seeing a lot of sellers into the space. The cocktail shaker space is kind of the space that we're playing in for one of our brands. And this is where this set, was established. Was this, let's call it roughly like 30% of the business. It had basically started having rank bleed, right? The rank started dropping. We were doing all these different things, all these different tricks, hacks, things we learned at BDSS, right? Things we heard along the way from different e-commerce sellers, like from podcasts like this, just a whole bunch of different things. We tried everything from like traditional white hat strategies to little like towing the line, like gray hat strategies, right? Sure. We were firmly in this like rebate flow game, right, for a long time. Then they cracked it down. There's a few different variations of that, right?
Yep.
You can think of it. We were doing it to try to turn around this product. And this competitor had stayed true to what they were doing, right? From the beginning, we knew that, through this information memorandum, that basically we're producing the same exact quality shaker as us. This certain grade stainless steel is the same as ours.
Okay.
If you strip down all the marketing speech, it's effectively the same product. And however, what they did do, though, was they got a couple patents on like there's a stand. They got a patent on it for the design. They did a couple other things and they got some patents, but they built out a product line. And from the beginning, even though they were getting way less sales, they were marketing their products for $10 to $20 more than ours. And on a main product compared to their main product, right, I think there's like a $17 difference at the time, right, in the beginning. That difference has actually grown, by the way, because while they were building that brand and like listening to what the customers were wanting and understanding that, hey, there's this story that they could paint, we were just focused purely on the product and trying to do all these things to capture more market share from a qualitative basis. We were focused on KPIs. We were focused on conversion rates. We were focused on which hero images were going to perform better. I mean, these are great things that you should focus on.
Sure.
But the things we were not doing, right, was the painting a story, right? What is our cohesive story for this brand? Adding on subsequent products that we can then drive like cross sales into this product, or what things can we do from this main hero product to do cross sales? And their price, now we're talking about fast forward a couple of years, right? So today, their price has never wavered. Even some of their products are now more expensive, right? They've increased price.
Yeah.
Like even more laying into their narrative of this premium quality, right? Like all this other stuff. And we tried to add that on now later, right? Try to like raise price, say premium, do all these kind of little like marketing tricks, and nothing's really working. Now, they still don't actually have as many reviews as us because there was just such a big difference, but they've dramatically closed that gap, right? Their star rating has stayed at 5 stars. I think it's like 4.8, right? Ours has stayed pretty consistently at 4.5. I think it's like 4.5 and actually like shows 4.5. But again, like we've actually had to come down on price a lot. And now there's this race to the bottom in this space where, if it wasn't for the fact that we were so diversified and we had this coffeeware side. We had a couple other brands. We're playing in a couple different markets where we've actually grown a lot. We would it is a shell of itself, this product, and we would be really hurting if it wasn't for that. And I say that because this is a story of us not listening to, again, going back, the squirrel feed is another one, but going back to this whole asset of, and I call it an asset because it really is, of this qualitative information that you can get from your customers, right? And what is it that they're saying, not just about the product, but about the brand, what they were saying about this brand all along, which we just completely weren't looking at because we were so focused on our KPIs and testing and iterating. Again, not saying that's bad. You should be doing those things. You should be doing a lot of that. But I think the qualitative stuff is something that we've now find ourselves having to readopt, right, from an e-commerce perspective, and really make it a big focus for us when we look at it, because with that, you can do a lot of things. And it's become, I think in terms of a trend, right, an actual industry trend, it's become a much bigger thing. If you're not building brands and you're not focused on the qualitative side of things, then, you're just selling product. And eventually it's going to happen like what happened with us with the cocktail shaker, where you have a business that is effectively suffering and competing on price. And we're going to lose on price all day long. Where a direct competitor now they're not competing on price, they're competing on brand. And so I think that's, this whole aspect of adding in when you're looking at what product you want to sell, even if you're launching a new product, right? Like you can get samples from suppliers, right? You can see, you can put the current leader and your sample in someone else's hand and be like, hey, what do you think about this, right? We do that now, right? And I think the amount that you learn is a much harder to kind of like reconstruct and paint a specific picture like you can with numbers. And so those two things in this day and age, and again, I don't think this is just applicable to e-commerce, right? I think this is applicable everywhere across the board in business. It's just a critical piece.
Yeah, no, I love that story that you shared there. And I think it's so important. And it's jogging a few ideas in my own mind of like things that we should be focused on in our own brand, because this entire year we've been so focused on like driving KPIs, establishing a scorecard for the business, where we at quantitatively all the time. But what we're not doing a great job of is kind of like what you talked about, is like we do have like our customer service monthly report, but like we're not building that into like, we're not tweaking our copy or anything like that based off of what we're learning. So if you could go back in time, Simone, like what was it that the customers were saying that you should have done if you could go back in time? Like what would you have done? What were people saying? And how could you have changed the narrative?
Yeah. So, well, one thing, people were really liking a different like shine on the cocktail shaker. And this is not like we were getting bad reviews, but hidden in good reviews were, and not just our reviews, like we also look at, especially now, we look at reviews of our competitors, but hidden in a lot of the good reviews was this concept of like just a different shine on the shaker, right? Like ours is, not that it's not shiny, but I would consider it maybe a little bit more matte than polished. And the look that people like right now is just polished, right? And that's like a very easy change. You just be like, hey, supplier, like, let me just change it from this look to a little bit more shiny. They can do that very easily. I know now they can do it very easily, but it's just not something that we're like, we're doing so well from conversion rate. How can we go from 20% to 22%, right? Like that's a huge, like that 2% increase in conversion rate is X amount of increase in revenue, right? Like great. So that actually was a really big one. The second thing is, people were really liking the aesthetic of their stand. And we had some stands, but we didn't, when we ran some tests, it was never the first thing that people pointed to when we did stuff online. We've gone back and we try to do different things with this product now, but the interesting thing is when we did stuff in person, people would pick up the stand and they would play with the stand a lot longer, and their eyes were drawn to this stand. And so while, we ran, a whole bunch of pick foods, and we've been running pick foods forever, right? We used to do pick foods on different products. We'd run 5-second tests on a whole bunch of different products way back in the day, like landing pages, home pages, different things, our different businesses. And so these are things that we brought into e-commerce too. When we did that, people weren't saying that, right? People would say like, oh, like I like the shininess, or oh, like this just looks more premium. And so we were focused very much on like the cocktail shaker and the tools and those things, because people, like, the concept of a stand never came up that much. However, when we got people in person, you could see their eyes like really drawn to this stand, right? And no matter if it's the thing was together, or we laid out all the tools and the stand was on the side, people inevitably came back to the stand, but no one verbally talked about it, right? And so I think, going back in time, we would do a lot of these things that I was talking about now, right? Getting people in front of you, right? Doing much more we call customer development, and really finding that like right product market fit. We would do that because we didn't, and it shows. I think the last thing is we can go back, from a, like, and this I guess maybe like falls back into a more quantitative a bit, but I think it's kind of a nice, how this is actually, they're not two different things, right? I think the way it should be working is you're using both in harmony with each other, and one should feed the other, which should feed the other, and you have this like really nice positive flywheel, ideally positive flywheel. But from a like iteration perspective, I think it's important that, when you're doing testing, and I wish we would had done this like from the very beginning, is when we do some of the pick food testing, it's very easy to just stand back and look at, okay, like this image one, let's throw up this image, right?
Yep.
And then, go on, do the next test and say, oh, this one won, let's do this one. Or, you throw up some bullets and you're like, oh, wow, like rank over this period of time is dramatically better than that. When you do some of that testing, there's a whole qualitative component, like even on pick food, right? Like the bottom is all the written responses.
Yep.
Right. There's all this interesting feedback that if you go through and understand why this one won, well, then it may be winning for reasons that you didn't expect. And that's kind of what was happening for us, right? We consistently would test out like hero image, and ours would win. But yet, our click-through rate never really it got better, but it never really like got that much better. And ultimately they improved upon us because there was this underlying, qualitative component to it where people were starting to say, or through like, you kind of have to parse through that they actually like the shiny bit more, or they like certain tools, or they really like the stand. But that we thought that, like we add some flair, like we make a non-TOS compliant hero image and, we'll have it up for as long as Amazon lets us, and that wins pick food, so it's going to win here. But those weren't the reasons why it was winning, right? And over time, we started to not win anymore because those things that people were saying underneath it, ultimately went out.
Yeah. I think those are great takeaways. And Simone, I know we talked about this prior to the interview, but you had a great kind of takeaway from $1 Billion Seller Summit, right? And it was just kind of like getting back to the basics. Is this the brand that you're kind of referring to, or is that kind of a separate story in and of itself?
Yeah, same brand. So, the beginning of this year was a little bit painful for us for a number of different reasons. I think a lot of e-commerce sellers are going through it. Just industry trends were tough, right? Like rate's going crazy. We're still reeling from that. And a number of other reasons, but, so basically for a few months prior to BDSS, we had a hero product, on the coffeeware side of this brand. And, so we talk about, historically speaking, there was 3 products that make up, let's call it like 75% of this brand's profit. And so one was the shaker set that we were talking about. And then another one was this, coffeeware AirPod. So, if you ever go into like a hotel conference room, right, this thing that holds like 3 liters of coffee is a pour spout. So we sell those. And, what we started seeing, let's call it from the spring, was we started seeing rank bleed. Not sure why. So, what used to be a bestseller, all of a sudden now no longer has bestseller badge. Now it's the middle of the page. Now it's kind of teetering off, falling off the first page. Even for like a few days, fell off the first page. And we were doing a lot of different things, like trying a whole bunch of different hacks, a whole bunch of different let's call them intermediate to advanced level stuff.
Yeah.
And things kind of worked for a little bit. We even were doing a bunch of external ads, and that was working for a little bit. Or not, the amount it was working was just a little bit, right? Like we were doing it for a while. And we're like, oh man, what is going on? We tried what we felt was like everything under the sun, went to the conference.
Yep.
And the conference was a really nice kind of reset for me. It was really nice. Okay. One of the speakers, Anthony from Data Dive, I thought he did a phenomenal job. And my biggest takeaway from what he was talking about was like, hey, let's get back to basics, right? Let's get back to the things that, if you can master the fundamentals, well, then you can start to build again. And so it was a question of, what? We are simply not executing well enough. And, it doesn't matter what kind of product you have, doesn't matter how good your star rating is or the reviews you have. If you don't execute, right? Same thing in anything, right? Sports, whatever. If you don't execute well, well, you're going to have suboptimal results. And I felt like that's what was happening. We simply were not doing the basics well enough. And so came back, told the team, okay, we're going to execute better, right? Like we are going to get back to square one. We're going to get back to listing optimization. We're going to get back to looking at what people are saying. Where can we improve our product? We are going to improve our images, but use these tools that we've kind of fallen away from, right? And because it used to be a bestseller badge, we kind of stopped touching it because this concept like, oh, well, we don't want to touch it. It's working, like the bestseller, right? Don't want to touch it, right?
Yep.
Terrible idea, by the way, right? Lesson learned, right? Terrible idea. Like it doesn't matter if you have the bestseller badge or you don't. Like you should be iterating on your product. You should be listening to your customers. You should be,
feedback.
You should be pick-fooing, right? You should, like, if you have 25% conversion rate, if you have 30% conversion rate, you can always get better conversion rate. You should, like, if you still have the same amount of traffic, but you have better conversion rate, you have more sales, right? It's that simple, right? Yeah. Your job should always be trying to get better conversion rate, right? And you do that by, listening to your customers, like consistently pick-fooling, seeing what people have to say, why people like certain things better than others, and then incorporating that into the next round of iteration. I think Anthony, again, did a great job of really highlighting that, and he had his own ways of doing it, which I loved. But anyway, so our AirPot, it lost a ton of rank, came back, and one of the first things we noticed was like, oh my God, some keywords have changed. The search volume has changed, and Amazon is doing different things in terms of weighting where the placement of certain keywords and how much emphasis they placed on that. It seemed like it changed. And so all we did was we took a keyword that was not in our title. We added it in the title, and it brought it from the bottom of the first page basically up to the top 4 results on that page for that main keyword, right?
Really?
And so the story doesn't end there. It was a parent ASIN, right? There's two child variations.
Okay.
So we're like, you know what? Okay, we're back, right? Let's break apart this so that we can capture more market share on the page.
Yep.
Broke it apart. The hero fell back again, almost like within a few days. It was crazy, right? The drop was precipitous. Like, what just happened?
Interesting.
So again, did the same thing. Got back to the basis. Was looking at the listing. Noticed that in the bullets, comparatively, right? We're just looking at our competitors, but also comparatively, the two child ASINs, we were looking at the placement of certain keywords on our key keywords in the bullets and also in the search terms. We played around with that. Used help from Data Dive to do a lot of this stuff. So shout out to those guys because their product I think is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And then shortly after that, rank started improving again. And last I checked, I think it was the end of last week, we had the bestseller badge. We started playing around with some price. I heard we just lost it, but we're going to drop price a little bit. And maybe I think we got a little greedy. But I think, I'm going to get it back again here. But long story short, in 2 months, right, since the end of the conference until, 2 months later, now it's a little bit more than 2 months, it went from X in terms of profit, and we doubled that. And this was already a 5-figure gross profit product.
Amazing. And
we doubled that just by these few text changes. And so, right, like I think we talk about some advanced strategies going from 7 to 8 figures. Right? This alone kind of did that for us, this one product and this one change. So I think you're never too big to get away from the basics, right? Like, and I think sometimes just going back to what they are is important because, Amazon's changing all the time, environment's changing all the time. And so now we're doing a couple different things surrounding those things and surrounding our variations, because I think it's, we talk about brand building and what people are liking and looking for and satisfying what people are saying. But yeah, that root change right there, I think was, kind of brand changing actually. So
fascinating. I think this is probably a good note to kind of start wrapping things up on here. So when you refer to like just getting back to the basics and you've been able to make some big shifts and double some sales on a super high volume product, what are those basics? Can you lay out those basics in kind of order of importance that you are now focusing on with your other brands? You have established brands. You're doing well. What you're saying is like, it's not some ninja hack or black hat tactic that I'm doing that's driving all these crazy results. You're like, hey, we haven't touched our title in X number of years, and we made one change and we shot from the bottom of page one to the top. So can you articulate to us, what are those basic things that people should be focused on that many of us have probably neglected if you have a product that you haven't touched in a few years? Yeah.
So I would say the top things, and I think there's some debate on which order you can do them. I think you kind of somewhat do them simultaneously, but I think your images, right, and then your title and bullets, title then bullets, are the most. Let's say the image carousel, right, are hands down the most important. And then you get into like A+ content, and then description from there, brand story, and then like back end keywords. I think they're kind of being phased out in some cases, but for us, they actually made a big impact still. So it's not being phased out everywhere yet, right? Or if it is being phased out, it's kind of rolling. So some places still works. But I think that's kind of the order that I would take things, because it seems like that's the order that Amazon is also taking them. And so this is all under a bucket of what I call, just basic listing optimization, right? Which is at the end of the day, conversion rate optimization, which at the end of the day, what you're talking about, right? Going back to kind of like market and what is your true thing, right? If you're not going to increase the search volume, right? Search volume's the same. And, let's say you're going to get roughly the same amount of clicks onto your page, but you have, 10% conversion rate, and that's makes you X amount of sales. The only way to increase this number of sales there, because if you're not going to have more clicks, right, you have to increase the conversion on your page. And so I think that's where everything starts, right? And if you can nail that, well, then you could do a lot of other things, right? Because then people are going to convert at a decent level. So you're going to be paying a lot of money potentially, but at least you're going to get some of that conversion back. And so I think everything starts there. And that's when you say back to basics. At least at Vimbly Group, we talk about, all right, let's focus on the listing optimization. Let's focus on the copy, the keyword research, those few elements that really matter. Yeah. And with the images, you listed those as like number one. Are there any quick tips that you would share about images that you would say that based on your tests have proven to be successful, that like some quick takeaways? Yeah. So I think PickFu is really good, right? PickFu style. There's a whole bunch of different services out there that do that. But I think a lot of people forget about the qualitative stuff, right? Understand why certain ones are winning, not just see the numbers, right? Number two is 5-second test. Anthony did a great job touting this, which was a good reminder for us that we got to do more of it. But making sure that people just flat out understand what they are looking at. I think it's kind of like a very basic thing, but I think sometimes we forget that when we're looking at something all the time, that someone who's looking at something for 5 seconds may not see it the same way. And I don't care how complex your product is, there is going to be a way that you can portray that in a manner in which someone who's quickly going through it can understand it. You just need to do the work to find it. It may be harder, it may take more time, right? If you have a more complex product, but you can do it, right? And I think you get a lot of garbage responses on some of these things, but there's a lot of good ones too. And it's just about, running it enough to kind of tease out some of those and to paint a nice mosaic about what's actually happening with your images, right? What people are understanding, what are the takeaways that they're getting from what it is that you've created. I love it.
I think those are some great takeaways, and thanks for sharing your experience with us, Simone. As we wrap things up here, I've got my 3 final questions that I will ask you. But before we get into that, I love to leave the audience with 3 actionable takeaways from each episode. So here are the 3 takeaways that I noted, Simone. Let me know if you think I'm missing something. So number 1, I'm going back to my notes here. So as we go back, 3 takeaways that people can implement is identifying the market opportunity for your products. Are you playing in a big market or are you playing in a small market? And you used a good reference where, the amount of effort and time that it takes to create the listing images, the title, the copy, and all of that for a product that is in a small market is actually the same amount of time that it's going to take to launch a product in a bigger market. Now, with capital being aside, right, as you look at your return on investment, you need to start seeing, like, if I launch this product, what products am I saying no to? Or if I'm acquiring this brand, what other brands am I saying no to? And I think you can use that kind of like big versus small market opportunity. No matter what business you're in, whether you're looking at products, acquiring businesses, or you're looking at new opportunities for yourself. So that's takeaway number 1 is identifying that. Number 2 is actually listening to your customers. And so we talked so much about the KPIs, understanding conversion rate, click-through rate, impressions, all of that stuff is good. But at the end of the day, get back to the basics of, like, do you understand what your customers are saying? When was the last time that you actually looked and fielded some customer service emails? We just had our VP of operations for our business cover customer service for 3 days. And although, you could say, hey, like, this guy's pay grade is much higher than, doing regular customer service, cut and paste, remarks. He now understands our brand, some of the pain points that customers are having better than he did before. And so I do it at least once a year. I cover customer service. So does my wife. So we can get a little flavor of, like, wait, what are people actually saying? So that's a quick takeaway. And then last final takeaway is get back to the basics and keep testing, keep iterating, because that conversion rate's one of the most important things. Whether you're selling on Shopify or on Amazon, don't just set it and forget it. Again, there's a lot of the gurus that preached, oh, Amazon, make all this passive income. Like, that's not what e-commerce is about. It is not passive income. You have to be regularly testing, or like you kind of shared in your story there, Simone, like, somebody else is going to start to chip away at that market share. And you're going to look back a couple years later and be like, oh, crap, where did it all go? We've seen that happen in our own business as well. And so this is me talking to myself at the exact same time. So those are, I think, 3 real actionable takeaways that everybody can apply to their business. Simone, is there anything else that comes to your mind that we didn't cover?
I think you got it all. I could see that you must have done really well in school. You listened intently the entire time.
Well, thank you. I've been jotting down notes because you were sharing a lot of great value. Simone, as we wrap things up here, what has been your most influential book that you've read and why?
So I think I'm going to go a little bit off the map on this one. I think most of the time, probably people come on these type of podcasts and say stuff related to e-commerce or business in general. I got a ton of those, but because people use that often, I'm going to go with something a little different. The book is called The Power of Dreams, Why We Sleep and Why It Matters. It's by Matthew Walker. The analogy that I like to give is effectively, look, if you're not optimizing your sleep, it's kind of like you're stepping over dollar bills to pick up nickels, right? Like, everything stems from getting the requisite amount of sleep. And I think people take it for granted. I think we live in a society in the US here where, right, it's like kind of like, working these 80-hour, 90-hour, 100-hour weeks, getting almost no sleep, like, is often promoted. But I think if you took a step back and you did an experiment on yourself, and I got this Oura ring to prove it, and productivity, accomplishments to prove it, where if you took a step back, you got a requisite amount of sleep for you. The amount of clarity that you have when you're working and the amount of creativity that you can add to that clarity is incredible. And so I think there's almost nothing more important than sleep. And this book kind of dives into the importance of it. To be perfectly frank, I was scared. It scared the crap out of me because of the negative ramifications of not getting enough sleep, which, coming from the investment banking world, I lived for a long time.
Sure.
So, that
is
book.
Great feedback. That's one I'm going to have to check out. And that's probably going to lead into the next thing. What's your favorite productivity tool or resource?
Well, so I got two for you. One is this Oura Ring.
Okay.
Lately. Also, as a quick call back to, we talked about customer support, right? Like, these guys have a phenomenal product. I can't even tell you how great this product is and how much it's impacted not only my life on a day-to-day basis, but also some of my close friends and family. Because I have not stopped talking about how great Oura is, how important sleep is, and how they should iterate on it, and read this book and all this stuff. But their customer support is so bad, and you can go on Facebook and you can see it's littered, including posts from me, littered with responses on their posts with people who are irate with their customer support. Basically, they have this problem where they grew really, really fast, and they claim that they didn't get the customers, they didn't have enough help, and they couldn't hire people fast enough to handle all the customer support. Interesting. So take that for what it is. But it's made me, less thrilled about the brand, not want to upgrade. This was the third ring I have, and I upgraded a couple times. Okay. I almost don't want to, and I still love the product itself, but because I don't like the brand anymore because of this terrible customer support experience, I almost don't want to level up, right? I don't want to get the next product that they come out with or the next version of this, even though I'm now a lifetime user of this thing, because of their customer support. Interesting. So that's one. And for the second one, I think for a productivity standpoint, I really like Workflowy. It's really light, easy to use. It's kind of like a bullet system or a Google Doc system, but then you can zoom into or zoom out of bullets. And that's cool. It's like a single doc that you can have access to on your phone or your laptop, kind of wherever, right? There's both a mobile app and a desktop app. And you can just set up, your few main bullets and then zoom into each one and continuously zoom in, zoom out, what have you. But it's effectively kind of starts out in one doc. So it's a nice little light thing where I do a lot of my planning. I do personal stuff. I have some work stuff. And it's really easy and lightweight. And I think for me, simple tools always end up being the best because then they're easy to use. They're quick to use. You can have access to them anywhere. And it's kind of, not a lot of bells and whistles. It's kind of a big thing for me, kind of decluttering.
So Workflowy, correct?
Workflowy.
All right.
Yep.
Workflowy. All right. Very good. I'll check that one out too. All right. Last question. Who's somebody that you admire the most or respect the most in the e-commerce space that other people should be paying attention to?
Yeah. I actually really like, so I don't know him that well. I met him, I had a chance to talk to him a couple times at BDSS, but I think Kevin King is, I'm really impressed with his ability to grapple with some of the new things out there. And I really like the new thing that he's working on where he's basically, he's promoting something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. Kind of this eco-friendly nature. He's got this new kind of plastic technology that kind of disintegrates in water, which I think is mind-blowing to me. But he's incorporating a lot of things that is going beyond just traditional e-commerce selling, and that's really incorporating a lot of stuff that, from our roots, I think is really cool. Or from my roots, right, at Vimbly Group is really cool, where he's incorporating a lot of new technologies into selling product. And he's selling product that is meaningful to the world, right? It's meaningful to people. He's trying to make a difference. And I think, that's kind of everything that we're talking about here, right? You look at big market opportunity, you look at listening to what people are saying, right? Where's this wave of people, what they're looking for, people want to make a difference in what's happening, and in the environment, right? And he's kind of bringing it back to the basics in selling, but he's taking all these advanced technologies and he's bringing it back to doing that. And I think that's pretty cool. So
I'm a big follower of Kevin King and the $1 Billion Seller Summit that he put together. That's where you and I met. We've had Kevin King on the podcast before, so go back. It's one of our first few episodes for people to go back, and he dropped a lot of great knowledge there. Simone, this has been a pleasure. Where can people reach out to you if they have more questions, want to follow you, and get in touch with you?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Simone Hammer, and it's spelled like Simon. I have to always say that because I always get some people who say, hey, I can't find you, and I'm like, drop the E. And you know, in this day and age, it's kind of a shocker, but I'm on social media, but don't find me there because I don't go on, and try to make it a point not to go on. Or you can email me. It's simone@vimbligroup.com, and I'll usually get back to you pretty quickly.
Awesome. Well, Simone, thank you so much for your time. Hopefully we'll follow up in some future episodes and see how things have been going for you later down the line. But thanks for your time today.
Yeah, awesome, Josh. Thanks. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening. Visit ecommbreakthrough.com for more information. If you've enjoyed today's episode, the best way you can show your appreciation is by clicking the subscribe button and quickly leaving a review. See you again next time.